Ryan Clark was pulled off a live broadcast. Cam Newton was gone, less than a year after ESPN expanded his role. ESPN called it restructuring, but that explanation leaves out some important details. From on-air controversies to behind-the-scenes friction, let's take a look at the details ESPN doesn't want people focusing on. Here's the moment that kicked all of this off. Ryan Clark was sitting on the set of NFL Live, on air, doing his job like any other Monday. Behind the scenes, though, the machinery of a mass layoff was already turning. According to The Athletic, Clark was informed that he was being let go during a commercial break while the show was still airing live, and he did not return for the remainder of the broadcast. Think about that for a second. He's mid-broadcast, cameras cut to break, and somebody tells him it's over. He doesn't come back after the commercial. No goodbye segment, no farewell moment with his co-hosts, nothing. He just vanishes from the show he'd been part of for over a decade. Now, ESPN and its defenders tried to soften this story almost immediately. TMZ Sports put out a report claiming Clark wasn't actually forced off mid-show. Clark didn't let that stand. He went straight to social media and hit back, writing out the exchange himself. He'd asked point blank if he should be done for the day, and the answer he got back was yes. That single exchange, his question, their answer, is the whole story of how ESPN handled a guy who'd been there 11 years. Why the rush? ESPN planned to tell Clark that he was let go on Tuesday morning, in line with other layoffs, but media inquiries had led the network to fear that Clark would find out he was fired online before it had a chance to tell him, per multiple reports. In other words, the network's hand was forced by reporters, closing in on the story, not by any plan to handle Clark with care. After Outkick's Dan Zakrzewski and Bobby Burak contacted ESPN PR about an impending story detailing the dismissal, executives rushed to yank Clark off the broadcast so he would not read about his firing on social media. So the compassion ESPN talked about in its internal memo came second to controlling the news cycle. That's worth sitting with. So the compassion ESPN talked about in its internal memo came second to controlling the news cycle. That's worth sitting with. Cam Newton's exit looked different on the surface. No live TV ambush, but the timing was just as jarring. In August 2025, ESPN announced a new multi-year agreement that expanded his presence on First Take. The network expected Newton to appear more frequently alongside Stephen A. Smith and the program's rotating group of contributors. ESPN executive David Roberts praised Newton's willingness to be himself and called that quality an important part of succeeding on the debate show. Less than a year after that vote of confidence, he was gone. That recent commitment makes the reported separation particularly notable. It suggests Newton's departure was not simply the expiration of a short-term TV arrangement. Newton was only with ESPN for a few years. He signed on in late 2024, but found success opposite Stephen A. Smith during the NFL season, where he was Sass's main debate partner on First Take. Newton was elevated into the premier spot after Shannon Sharpe parted ways with ESPN last year. That's the Monday slot, the highest-rated day of the week for the show. Last season, the network elevated Newton to replace Shannon Sharpe as Smith's primary Monday co-host on First Take, the show's highest-rated day of the week. And then in one stretch of cuts, both of them were out the door, alongside Carl Ravitch, Tom Pelissero, Charles Davis, Stefania Bell, and David Lloyd. The network parted ways with several high-profile personalities on Tuesday, including Ryan Clark, Cam Newton, Tom Pelissero, and longtime broadcaster Carl Ravitch. What ESPN told the public was corporate language about restructuring. What ESPN didn't say, at least not officially, is why Clark and Newton specifically were the names on that list. Out of everyone at the network, that's the part worth digging into, because the official memo and the actual on-the-ground reality of how these two men were treated tell two very different stories. Let's talk about the paper trail ESPN wanted people to see. A leaked internal memo from ESPN chairman Jimmy Pitaro later provided the explanation. According to Front Office Sports, Pitaro told employees that ESPN's recent integration of NFL Network and other NFL media assets drove most of the layoffs. Disney completed the transaction earlier this year, giving the NFL a 10% ownership stake in ESPN as part of the agreement. That's the corporate version. Pitaro framed it as a structural cleanup tied to the NFL Network merger. Nothing personal, just business. Pitaro wrote that over the past several months, we've made significant progress integrating the NFL assets that we acquired into ESPN. He also promised something specific about how people would be treated. In a memo to employees obtained by the Daily Beast, ESPN chairman Jimmy Pitaro said the company had made difficult decisions made about job impacts as it reshaped its operations. Pitaro pledged that the company would treat affected employees with compassion and respect. Compassion and respect. Keep that phrase in your head because we've already seen what it looked like for the guy who got pulled off a live broadcast mid-segment. Here's what the memo conveniently left out. Individual reasoning. Neither Pitaro's memo nor ESPN identified individual reasons for any employee's departure. Instead, the memo framed the layoffs as part of a broader restructuring effort, following the company's integration of newly acquired NFL properties. So no one at ESPN has ever officially said, on the record, here's specifically why we chose Ryan Clark, or here's specifically why we chose Cam Newton. It's all been bundled into one broad umbrella of corporate integration. That's convenient, because it means nobody at the network has to answer for anything more pointed. But other reporting filled in gaps the memo didn't touch. On the money side, the picture gets clearer. By letting go of the big money personalities, ESPN is targeting an estimated $15 million to $16 million in annual talent payroll savings. Newton's deal alone was a chunk of that. Newton, who earned an estimated $2 million annually under the multi-year deal he signed in August 2025, was one of the largest single contracts on the debate circuit. Clark's number was in the same neighborhood. He was reportedly earning more than $2 million per year under his current contract, which was signed in February 2024. Put those two contracts together and you're talking about roughly $4 million a year in combined salary gone from the books in one swing. That's real money in a payroll trimming exercise, and it's a detail that fits neatly with the restructuring language, but it's also a detail ESPN never spelled out itself. Reporters had to go find it. Then there's the part that's harder to put a dollar figure on, the behind-the-scenes friction. One outlet put it plainly, while the network's public reasoning was about corporate integration, the tension building around these personalities had been simmering for a while. While corporate restructuring was the official reason, high contract costs and behind-the-scenes friction most certainly accelerated the decision. For Clark, that friction had a name and a paper trail. Former ESPN personality Ryan Clark was fired yesterday, with his on-air persona being a factor that led to his dismissal. According to The Athletic, that's a specific claim, sourced to a specific outlet, and it doesn't appear anywhere in Pitaro's memo. If Clark's on-air style genuinely factored into the call to let him go, that's a very different story than we merged with NFL Network and had to make cuts. One is structural, the other is personal. ESPN chose to only ever talk about the first one publicly. For Newton, the pattern is even more visible. If you look at his run of controversies leading up to the layoff, during the season, he was at the center of a very strange vendetta that First Take had with Patriots quarterback Drake May. In February, he made bizarre comments about women's value being tied to the number of children they have. Criticism even came from colleagues within ESPN after he had Stephen A. Smith's arch-enemy, Jason Whitlock, on his podcast. Even Smith himself had weighed in publicly on that Whitlock episode, saying there were legitimate questions about Newton's fit on the show, even while still backing his colleagues' right to appear. In response, Smith stated that there were a number of reasons why Newton's First Take presence could be questioned, but that he was still supportive of his appearances on the program. None of that made it into any official ESPN statement about the layoffs. The network's public position stayed locked on one word: integration. If the memo was ESPN trying to manage the message, what happened next was the message getting away from them completely. Because the people who actually worked with Clark and Newton didn't stick to the script. Start with Stephen A. Smith, who lost both of his primary Monday debate partners in 1 week. Cam Newton is out at ESPN as part of layoffs, leaving Stephen A. Smith without his primary Monday co-host on First Take during football season. Smith didn't wait for a press release to react. He went straight to his own YouTube channel. Stephen A. Smith is blowing his top after ESPN cold-bloodedly axed his friend, Ryan Clark. Outkick first confirmed the details of Clark's exit, revealing that executives pulled the plug on the Super Bowl champion while he was actively co-hosting NFL Live on live television. After learning the mothership had tossed his broadcast partner into the corporate meat grinder, Smith went straight to his YouTube show and let it rip. He didn't hold back on how he felt about Clark specifically. Smith described Clark as arguably the best NFL analyst in America and called him a friend and a brother. He said he had tried to hold back from responding publicly as online criticism of Clark grew, and he described just how hard that restraint had been. Over the last few hours, I had to really refrain. DN, they got blisters on my tongue and my fingers from biting my tongue, and biting my fingers from refraining from going after folks when I saw how people were talking about him. He said, when I saw how people were talking about him, I was like, they don't know him at all. More important than the emotion, though, is what Smith revealed about the process. He confirmed he was actually consulted before the decision was finalized, and that his input got overruled anyway. Was I asked what I thought what my feelings were? Yes, I was. Smith admitted during his stream. Of course I said we have to keep them, but I don't get to make those decisions, and I don't get to ignore the fiscal and financial circumstances and ultimate ramifications that come with the job. That's the network's biggest star, on record, saying he argued to keep Clark and got overruled by the same bosses who then put out a memo about compassion and respect. He even said as much directly. Smith was asked for his opinion on the layoffs and made it clear he wanted to keep Clark. But ultimately, the decision was not his to make, and he closed his message to Clark like family. Family. Smith concluded his video with a heartfelt message to Clark saying, "Love you, bro. You know that. Always here. Talk to you soon." Then there's Deion Sanders, who has personal history with both men. He didn't mince words either. Colorado Buffaloes head coach Deion Sanders, a close friend of both Clark and Newton, made it clear he believes the network made a mistake by letting them go. Sanders even called Clark arguably the best talent on the ESPN roster. His post went further, calling out the fact that other, less impactful names on the roster kept their jobs while Clark and reportedly Newton did not. How can you know WHO still be there and Ryan Clark ain't? Wow. And please tell me the rumors of Cam Newton ain't true and this dude is still there. That's a third and fourth voice, both naming specific frustration with who ESPN chose to protect versus who it chose to cut. Add to that the reaction inside the building itself. Dan Dakich weighed in live on air. The moment word broke, Dan Dakich gives his reaction to Ryan Clark being laid off by ESPN on Monday while he was live on air. That's a fifth name reacting in real time. Unscripted, on a broadcast ESPN didn't plan around this news. And the two men at the center of it all responded very differently from each other, which matters. Clark chose defiance mixed with grace. Less than 24 hours after learning he had been let go, Clark shared photos and videos of himself working out on Instagram with the caption, "Proof of life." Before the madness of yesterday, I woke up, got in my Tundra, drove to Planet Fitness, and got to work. The rest of the day was eventful, but the journey continues. My peace is with God, and my humility comes from within. I'll continue to build myself so the world can never strip me of what's real. Newton, meanwhile, tried to frame the whole thing as a lesson rather than a wound. On his own podcast, he described his ESPN run almost like a stepping stone. I was counseled to say, "Cam, there is not another platform on linear television in your field like ESPN," Newton shared on the Fourth One podcast. And that was truer words that could not be spoken any clearer. You can't make me hate ESPN, what I've learned. It was an internship almost. Different tones, same undercurrent. Both men were blindsided by a company that had, months earlier, been telling them they were the future of its NFL coverage. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this isn't the first time ESPN has run this exact play. Cut the expensive personalities, call it restructuring, move on. And looking at that pattern tells you a lot about what actually decided who stayed and who left this time. Go back to the Monday co-host chair itself. That seat has been a graveyard for the network's biggest names for years now. ESPN has paid people between $2 to $6 million a year to be Stephen A's main debate partner on Mondays during the football season. Since Kellerman left, ESPN has now fired them all. Michael Irvin, Shannon Sharpe, and Cam Newton. Read that again. 3 straight occupants of that chair, all let go. Irvin, then Sharpe, then Newton. That's not a coincidence. That's a track record. Whatever ESPN says about integration this time, the Monday seat next to Stephen A. Smith has quietly become one of the most expensive and most disposable jobs in sports TV. And this wasn't even the first mass layoff of this scale at the network in recent memory. ESPN also let go of notable figures in 2023, the last time they laid off people on a large scale. Jeff Van Gundy, Todd McShay, Suzy Kolber, and others were part of those cuts. 20 commentators were dismissed in that round. So this is a network with a documented habit of periodically clearing out well-paid on-air names, dressed up each time in corporate language about restructuring. What made this particular round land differently is the optics of how it was carried out. Ravitch found out through the same channel viewers did. Carl Ravitch discovered his own fate through social media. Clark found out mid-broadcast. Newton found out after a year of being told he was the network's guy for the future. 3 very different treatments, all bundled under one memo about compassion. There's also the money angle that keeps resurfacing no matter how ESPN frames it. The network wasn't struggling. The moves came despite ESPN's strong financial performance and left many wondering why the company made such sweeping cuts. That's a detail that undercuts the pure we had no choice reading of events. A network posting strong numbers doesn't need to cut 10 jobs purely to survive. It cuts them to optimize. And optimizing in this case seems to have meant targeting exactly the kind of names that draw controversy along with ratings. Clark's on-air history includes plenty of moments that generated headlines for the wrong reasons. The run-in with Peter Schrager on Get Up that ended in a public apology. The comments about Tua Tagovailoa's body that had fans calling for him to be pulled off air. The controversy over comments about Robert Griffin III's wife that even Stephen A. Smith had to publicly defend him over at the time. None of those incidents got Clark fired in the moment. Stephen A. made that clear back then too, telling critics flatly that it wasn't a fireable offense and that he wouldn't stay quiet if his colleague and friend actually lost his job over it. But taken together, they build a picture of someone who'd become, in the industry's own words, a recurring source of friction, the exact phrase used to describe what accelerated the decision to let him go. Newton's file reads similarly. The Drake May storyline that dragged on all season. The comments about women that drew internal criticism. The running feud with Jalen Hurts backers over his quarterback rankings. The invitation to Jason Whitlock that visibly irritated the very co-host he was supposed to be complimenting. Every one of those moments generated clicks. Every one of those moments also generated a headache for management. So when you line up the money, roughly $4 million combined in guaranteed salary, against the friction, you get a much more specific answer than NFL network integration. You get 2 names that were simultaneously expensive and complicated, in a round of cuts that conveniently let the network fold both problems into one tidy explanation about corporate restructuring. That's the piece ESPN's own memo never had to address. It didn't need to, because bundling everyone under one umbrella meant no single justification had to hold up to scrutiny on its own. So where does this actually leave the 2 of them, and what happens next? Clark's situation resolved fastest, at least in terms of what he's landing on. He's still got The Pivot, the podcast he built with former teammates. That's grown into its own media property outside ESPN's walls entirely. Newton himself pointed to that as proof his friend would be fine. What I will tell you is this. The former quarterback said, Ryan Clark is going to be okay. The Pivot ain't going nowhere. That's not corporate spin. That's one laid-off colleague vouching for another. Newton's own landing spot follows the same logic. He wasn't relying on ESPN as his only outlet even while he had the job. Newton, who earned over $133 million as an NFL star, isn't completely without work. The retired signal caller hosts 2 successful podcasts, Fourth One and Funky Friday. He said as much himself, describing the ESPN chair as something closer to a stepping stone than a destination. Newton was a contributor for ESPN's First Take. He said he viewed his time at ESPN as an opportunity to learn and draw attention to his own brand. I knew that was what my intentions were, Newton said. He even admitted the layoff itself didn't blindside him the way it might have blindsided someone without his own platform already built. He wasn't expecting to be laid off, he said, but he knew that it could be a possibility given past trends. Clark, for his part, made it clear on his own channels that his sense of who he is doesn't depend on a network badge. That workout video, that caption about peace and humility, wasn't just a morale post. It was a message to a company that had just pulled him off air mid-segment, telling them they didn't get to define him. As for ESPN, the fallout from how this was handled hasn't gone away. Fans openly started questioning their loyalty to the network's shows in the days after. Hiring and firing employees is a part of business, but handling them in an unprofessional manner can lead to fans loathing the network. ESPN's handling of the recent layoffs has certainly not sat well with fans, as they are questioning whether they should continue watching the network's shows with the same enthusiasm as before. Smith is still there, still the face of First Take, now heading into a season without either of his last two Monday partners for the first time in years. Smith will be without his two main analysts during the football season in Newton and Clark. ESPN has already said it's moving on to find someone new. Sources say ESPN will look for a permanent replacement for Newton on the Monday editions of the show. Whoever they pick next steps into a chair that's now claimed three names running: Irvin, Sharp, Newton. Each one shown the door once the numbers stopped lining up. Clark's chair on NFL Live is a similar story, minus the name recognition of who's next, but with the exact same quiet lesson underneath it at ESPN right now. Being good at the job and being popular with the audience isn't the same as being safe. What Pitaro's memo called integration, the people actually living through it, experienced as something a lot more personal. A live mic cut mid-sentence, a multi-year deal that meant nothing a year later, and a group chat full of friends and colleagues finding out from the internet before they heard it from their own bosses. That's the story ESPN's statement never quite told. The people who lived it told it instead. Ryan Clark disputes claim that he wasn't forced to leave ESPN mid-show. Deion Sanders blasts ESPN over Ryan Clark, Cam Newton firings. Leaked ESPN memo reveals why network axed Ryan Clark, Cam Newton, and so many other big names. You can't make me hate ESPN. Cam Newton breaks silence after abrupt firing, alongside Ryan Clark in mass layoffs exclusive ESPN to part ways with Cam Newton, as part of talent layoffs that also included Ryan Clark. Cam Newton among ESPN layoffs. After First Take rise, why Cam Newton was fired by ESPN in latest round of on-air layoffs. Why ESPN laid off Cam Newton inside the First Take cuts, salary savings, and corporate restructuring. Cam Newton reportedly fired by ESPN. Latest big layoff at network. Carolina Panthers legend Cam Newton gets bad news from ESPN. Report. Cam Newton reacts to ESPN layoffs. Nothing else could surprise me. Ryan Clark reveals if he was forced off air before ESPN fired him. Stephen A. Smith reacts to ESPN firing Ryan Clark. Cam Newton. ESPN's Ryan Clark apologizes after awkward non-player comment.